All right, hi everyone. Thanks for joining. This is Georgii. Today we'll be doing an introduction to Salesforce Industries, Communications Cloud, and OmniStudio. So we actually had the session live yesterday, but I neglected to record it, so I'm re-recording this offline just so that we have the recording available. We won't have the Q&A session, unfortunately, but I'll try to cover the questions that came up during the Q&A as I'm going through the slides. And then if you have any other questions that the session didn't explain, feel free to just reach out to me on LinkedIn and shoot me a message. Happy to talk offline. All right, so let's get started. For those of you that are new to this group, this is the Dubai Salesforce Architect Group. The group is primarily targeted for Salesforce architects and architectural topics in the Salesforce world, but this is applicable for pretty much everyone in the ecosystem if you're open to increasing your knowledge about different architectural topics. So if you're a Salesforce admin, developer, consultant, BA, end user, whatever your role is, if you're interested in learning about architecture, this is the group for you. And then in terms of topics, we'll go from beginner level topics to quite deep, technical topics and everything in between. We'll be focusing on doing primarily in-person meetings in Dubai, but we will have some virtual meetings like this one. So look forward to a mix of both. And then in terms of topics, we'll cover not only technical topics, but also soft skills like presentation skills, governance, that sort of thing, career, all of that kind of stuff. So, it will be a mix of both technical and non-technical topics. And if you're interested in doing a presentation as part of this group, we would be happy to have you. And it's a good opportunity for you to practice your public speaking skills and communication skills. So if you're interested, do reach out to me, Neha, or Madan, the organizers of this group, and we can get you slotted in the calendar for a future event. So if you solved some architectural topic on your project or on your customer, this could be a good avenue to share your learnings from that with the group. And then our next meetings are planned for February and March. Stay tuned for those. We'll post those. We'll post those on LinkedIn and as part of the Trailblazer community group. So take a look at those when they come out. So to introduce myself before we jump into the content, my name is Georgii Saveliev. I'm a communications cloud architect based in Dubai. The name is pronounced Georgii with a soft G, not Georgie. I'm originally from Russia, grew up in the US, and have lived in a few other places in between. So prior to moving to Dubai, I was in Netherlands when I joined Velocity prior to the Salesforce acquisition, and then relocated to Singapore just after the Salesforce acquisition of Velocity. And most recently, a few months ago, I left Salesforce, left Singapore, and moved here to Dubai. And I love Salesforce as well. So I've been in the Salesforce ecosystem for about 8 years full time. I first touched Salesforce in 2013, so almost 10 years since then. And I've been in the IT world for 15 years. I started my journey at a customer at General Electric. I moved to an SI, spent some time there, then moved to an ISV, specifically Velocity, joined Salesforce through the Velocity acquisition, and now I'm an entrepreneur. In terms of Salesforce knowledge, I'm a Salesforce Certified Technical Architect, or a CTA, and I have 38 Salesforce certifications, including CTA. And then on the personal side, I love PC gaming. I'm a big AMD fan. Also love traveling and roller skating in terms of physical exercise. All right, so let's jump in. Okay, so for today's topic, we'll do an introduction to Industry Cloud and Communications Cloud so that you have the context of those, but the primary focus of the session will be on OmniStudio because all of these topics are quite large, and to cover only one in a little bit of depth would take an hour, so I chose to focus on OmniStudio, but I'll give you a little context on Industry Cloud and Communications Cloud so you can see how it all fits together. Then we'll go through the different components that are available as part of OmniStudio. We'll do a demo so we can see how these components fit together, what they look like in real life, how they work from a configuration point of view. We'll then go through the different OmniStudio and Salesforce Industries credentials that are available and some additional resources if you want to learn more. So some quick context on Salesforce Industries. Prior to June 1st, 2020, there were the following industries as part of Salesforce Industries. So we have health, manufacturing, consumer goods, et cetera. I think the one most folks have at least heard of in the past is Financial Service Cloud. So all of that was a part of Salesforce Industries. There was also Velocity, and 6 industries available as Velocity that were gaining quite some traction. Communications and insurance are the big ones. And then Salesforce announced the acquisition and completed the acquisition of Velocity on June 1st, 2020. And now, all of the former Velocity clouds were absorbed into Salesforce Industries, and basically all of this stuff together is what is considered Salesforce Industries today. But just for you to have some historical context of why different things are available in different industries. So this is what the different industry clouds look like today. So the top part of this diagram here shows the industry clouds that either were former Velocity industry clouds, or the former Velocity industry clouds were absorbed into an existing Salesforce industry cloud. So the former Velocity industry clouds that were basically rebranded are the following. So we have communications, media, energy. All of these 3 are quite similar from a technical perspective. And then public sector. So these 4 comprise the ones that were more or less rebranded. And then there are health cloud and financial services cloud. So these were existing prior to the acquisition, but they've been enhanced with some of the Velocity components. Then we have the bottom 6 here, which are all of the former Salesforce industry clouds. As far as I know today, I'm not 100% sure on this, but I think consumer goods cloud and manufacturing cloud now have OmniStudio available. I don't think it's available as part of the other clouds today, and I wouldn't be surprised if OmniStudio becomes available someday. We'll see what happens there. But yeah, when we're talking about OmniStudio, basically it applies to these 6 for sure, and I believe these 2. Okay, so to give you some more context on like what exactly is an industry cloud, what does that mean? Is this a completely separate product? Is this like enhancements on top of existing products? What actually is it? I took this marketing architecture slide that shows for communications cloud specifically what it actually means. So when we say communications, that really means telco. If you're based in UAE, you know of Etisalat, Do. If you're in the US, you know of AT&T, T-Mobile, etc. In Europe, T-Mobile, British Telecom, all of these telco companies that I'm sure that you use every day. This is an industry cloud solution for a telco that's selling and servicing telco customers. And the basic idea here is at the bottom of this diagram, we have Sales and Service Cloud and the Salesforce platform. So this is what I'm sure all of you have worked with extensively. In Sales Cloud, we have opportunity management. In Service Cloud, we have case management. The Salesforce platform gives us great things like Apex, custom objects, LWCs, all of that stuff. That forms the basis of Industry Cloud, and all of that is available if you are an Industry Cloud customer. The piece on top of that, which Industry Cloud gives us, is the following. So we have this bottom piece, this industry interaction platform, which is also known as OmniStudio. These are horizontal digital experience building tools that allow us to create, nice UIs, nice guided selling processes, and nice backend components that allow us to connect to all of our systems. And this is what we'll be focusing on in today's session. So I'll describe that in a little bit more detail later. But this layer is not industry specific. This could be used really in any industry. It's not tied to telco. It's more of a set of tooling that makes it easier to build these experiences. Then the rest of the modules are more industry specific. So we have the industry data model. This will vary industry to industry. In communications cloud, the business scenarios we have to think about are, as a telco, I want to sell mobile service, internet service, handsets, that sort of thing to my customers. Once my customer purchases the service, I also want to be able to, manage any cases or complaints that they have. Maybe there is an outage, the customer isn't able to use their internet service. They'll call the call center, log a case against one of their services. That's the general business scenario we're talking about here. And this industry data model is extensions to the data model that's available as part of Sales and Service Cloud to suit those use cases. So in that example, we're talking about mobile products, we're talking about internet products. For those things, we'd probably want to know, how much data do we have? How much SMS minutes do we have for the internet? What is the speed? How do we track those subscriptions? All of that stuff is represented in the industry data model. Then the next layer is the functional modules. So there are quite a lot of things here. The biggest pieces of this are CPQ, or configure price quote. This is different than Salesforce CPQ, which was formerly known as SteelBrick. This was an acquisition a few years back. This solution here, as part of Communications Cloud and also Media and Energy Cloud, is called Industry CPQ, or formerly Velocity CPQ. In general, both are CPQ tools, just they're suited for a bit different applications. So here we have CPQ as one piece, and then order management as another piece. Again, in Salesforce order management, that is more for, I believe it's more targeted for like retail and consumer goods scenarios to integrate with Commerce Cloud. Here, this industry order management is more suited for telco, energy, and media use cases, where it helps to fulfill the orders for those kind of services. And then there are a bunch of other components here. I don't have time to really deep dive into them. But the general idea is that every one of these industry clouds will have, the core sales service cloud will have OmniStudio for the most part, except for those ones that I mentioned on the previous slide, will have an industry data model, and then will have different functional modules. And then these vary significantly depending on exactly which industry cloud we're talking about. So here we're talking about communications cloud for telco, media, and energy look almost exactly the same. There are some differences in these two modules for the business applications. Again, I won't deep dive into that. If we're talking about something like financial services cloud, it will look quite different because the business scenarios that we have in financial services are different than what we have in telco, media, and energy. So hopefully that gives you the general idea. So really, to summarize, we have the core Salesforce platform with Sales and Service Cloud. We have an industry-specific data model. Generally, in most of the industry clouds, we have OmniStudio, and then each of the industry clouds will have its specific functional modules. Okay, so now let's talk about OmniStudio. So on the previous slide, we saw some terms like OmniScript, flex cards, data raptors, integration procedures. Let's dive into those in a bit more detail. So the general idea of this is to be able to build digital experiences. This can be something that's available for your sales and service reps within Salesforce in the Lightning experience. This can be available for customers and partners in a Experience Cloud site, formerly known as Community. And this can also be available for customers, partners, employees outside of Salesforce as well in third-party applications. So if we're talking about the telco space, as a telco customer, I would want to be able to go in to be able to order a mobile phone, order service with it, pick where should it be sent to, pick value-added services like roaming, Spotify, things like this. I should be able to place this order, select all of the things in the order, get a document generated that shows me a summary of it, and then eventually be provisioned those services that I ordered. The idea behind all of this OmniStudio is that you can, create in that scenario a guided selling journey via OmniStudio. So that would consist of an OmniScript, which would guide you through the journey. Maybe inside of the OmniScript, we're using the different components that we're talking about. And then that journey can be available inside of Salesforce for your sales and service agents, on a community for your customers, on a mobile app for your customers, or whatever channel you're talking about. And generally this, you might be thinking, okay, I'm familiar with, Flow and other tools within Salesforce. OmniScript is quite similar to ScreenFlow in terms of at a high level what it can do. But then when we go into a deeper level and see how easy it is to configure, how powerful it is, where it can be deployed, OmniStudio is quite more powerful than Flow and other tools that aren't available as part of OmniStudio. So the different components that we have available are the following. So there's OmniScript. This is for creating guided interactions. So generally, we have a business process with multiple steps. The customer or employee needs to go through each of the steps. There might be logic between the steps and so on. The analog to this in the Salesforce world would be a ScreenFlow. Then next up, we have flex cards. So this is what we'll see in the demo session. Flex cards are a way of declaratively building a no-code or low-code UI. And that UI can be surfacing data from within Salesforce or from other systems. And then from a flex card, we can launch a guided interaction or a OmniScript. So this is kind of the front end, user interaction layer, those two things. Then we have data raptors and integration procedures. So data raptors allow us to extract data from Salesforce, load data back into Salesforce, or transform data, for example, to transform XML to JSON, JSON to XML, or one JSON structure to another JSON structure. So this is typically used for interacting with the Salesforce database, or manipulating the structure of data for different API calls to other systems. And then we have integration procedures. So integration procedures are the analog to them would be a auto-launched flow. So this is kind of similar to an OmniScript, where we can define a series of steps that's happening, different business logic between the steps. And then this integration procedure can invoke a data raptor, can invoke an API call to another system. And the integration procedure itself can be invoked via Apex, a flex card, OmniScript, whatever. And then the integration procedure itself can also invoke Apex if you want to do something more complex. But basically, it's a way to declaratively build business logic. So these are the 4 main components. Then there are a few other components available here. We won't deep dive into them today, but just to give you a flavor. Interaction Console is for facilitating call center flows, where if you have a call center where you don't have a CTI integration, or the CTI isn't able to match a customer based on an incoming number, we would have a little modal that pops up in the service console. The agent can enter the customer's name, verify their birthday or other information, and then that will create and pop up a customer interaction, which will then be tied to that customer, tied to that agent, and tied to whatever they do during that interaction. For example, launching an OmniScript, launching Apex, whatever. There's Omni Analytics. So this is a tool to get analytical data behind the front end and back end components. So we could see that, for example, for some specific OmniScript, maybe our sales journey, a lot of customers are dropping off after the 3rd step. We could then see, okay, maybe that's because of performance, maybe because that's because we're asking for too many fields for them to enter, do some kind of analytical data. So it's analytics on top of the other components. And then these two, IDX Workbench and Project Explorer. IDX Workbench is the way that you can deploy all of these components, because these exist as a mix of data or custom and standard objects and metadata. So you wouldn't be able to deploy these things via change set. IDX Workbench and IDX CLI allow you to deploy it between different environments and to and from your source control. And then Project Explorer is kind of a UI to be able to group all of these different components together to then deploy them to your source control or between environments. So I've mentioned a few comparisons to different Salesforce core features, like in, for example, if we're talking about OmniScript, the kind of equivalent is a screen flow in Salesforce core. This diagram explains a little bit of a similar thing of, all of the different OmniStudio tools that we have available on the left-hand side, and kind of the equivalent or matching functionality is outside of OmniStudio. So again, on the interaction layer, we have OmniScripts and flex cards. In the process layer, we have decision tables, business rule engine, and document generation. I'll talk about these two in just a moment. And then on the data layer, we have data raptors, integration procedures, and data processing engine. And then on the right-hand side, we have all the things that are outside of OmniStudio. Okay, so let's dive a little bit deeper into flex cards. Flex cards are a way we can configure rich dynamic user interfaces with point-and-click declarative, no-code, low-code configuration. So if we see on the right-hand side, this is a screenshot of the flex card designer. So this is how you, as a platform app builder, would be able to go into a flex card and actually configure it. We can see here that we have an image of, this is showing some asset details. So the mobile phone assets that a telco provider has sold to a customer. On the left-hand side here, we can see an image of the phone. We can see a heading here that shows the customer's name and what kind of phone it is. On the right-hand side here, we can see some details about the asset itself. For example, the model number, the color, the size, the device, the IMEI, and other details. And then, all of this information is coming from Salesforce, coming from the asset record or related records. And you can see that, in this designer, we can already see it visually. This would be quite similar to how it ends up looking at runtime for a user. And then this flex card is driven by a data source. The data source will define, what is the information that's being surfaced in this flex card. So we're not hard coding all of these values. These values are dynamically coming from the asset record that this is referencing. Another powerful thing of flex cards is they can then launch guided processes with a context. So we see these two buttons for upgrade and modify service. So let's say that the user is on a 3-year-old iPhone 11. They want to upgrade to the latest model. They can click this upgrade button. We would pass the asset ID into the OmniScript that the upgrade button launches, and then that OmniScript would guide them through the process of upgrading from their iPhone 11 to whatever they want to upgrade to. And similarly for modifying service, let's say they're going on vacation, they want to add roaming data. They can go through this. This would pass the asset and have them be able to create and fulfill an order for activating that roaming. And we'll see that in the demo. OmniScript, again, this is kind of a more powerful version of screen flows. Basically, you define a series of different steps, business logic between all of the steps. Within each of the steps, you can have different fields, different inputs that the user is entering or data that they're seeing, and then conditions on all of these kind of things. And again, similar to the Flex Card Designer, this is very visual. So you'll have a what you see is what you get editor. Here we can see this has some insurance information. We can see a few different fields here. And as we're building the OmniScript, we can visually see, similar to how it would look in the runtime experience. And one really powerful thing that OmniScripts have that ScreenFlows do not is OmniScripts can be deployed outside of Salesforce. So for example, if you have a third-party customer portal, rather than using Experience Cloud Site, if you're using something like Adobe Experience Manager or any third-party web server or mobile app, and you want to deploy your OmniScripts and Flex cards to that third-party mobile app or web server, you can do that via a tool called OmniOut. In ScreenFlows, there's something called Lightning Out, but this is not GA, and it seems that it's not likely to go GA anytime soon. So there's no way to deploy your ScreenFlows outside of Salesforce. And then just a few screenshots of some OmniScripts so you can get a feel of what this actually would look like. On the left-hand side, we have a flow for insuring a customer's vehicles where we would enter the customer's address. So here we can see a map, we can enter an address, we can see that data gets populated into the fields as we're selecting things. In the middle, we would have a screen for the customer to enter or select their vehicle information. So here we could enter the vehicle, year, make, model, etc. And then on the right-hand side here, after they enter in all of the information about all of their vehicles, we would be able to give them a quote and say, okay, for insuring vehicle 1, your price is this. For insuring vehicle 2, your price is this. That means your total price is this. And so, we're walking the user through a series of steps that they would need to get an insurance quote. We're pulling some data from Salesforce, writing some data into Salesforce, communicating with different systems to, be able to get the pricing for this quote, communicate to all of the systems necessary to do this whole process. And generally, this can be done with just point and click configuration, or you can opt to use some pro code tools. For example, you can invoke some Apex if you need. So yeah, just a couple more screenshots of seeing some other things that we can do. So in an OmniScript, you can have different fields, and then depending on what you select in one step on one field, that could drive you to move to a different step, or to drive what's available or what's possible to do on the next step. So you can have a lot of this simple or complex business conditional logic between the steps or within the steps. And then, like I mentioned, the real power of this is that you can create this once and then use it across many different channels. So, if we're talking about call center agents that are working in a call center, service agents or sales agents, they could use the OmniScript or Flex cards within the Salesforce Lightning experience. For customers or partners, they could use the same Flex cards or OmniScripts within a community or an Experience Cloud site. And then if we're using the Salesforce mobile app or mobile publisher, we can drag and drop and embed those components there. Or if we have any third-party mobile apps or websites, we could deploy the OmniScripts and Flex cards to those third-party mobile apps and web services, web servers with OmniOut. And then if you're interested in OmniOut, here's a diagram of how it works. Basically, the OmniScript and FlexCard LWCs become web components, and then at runtime, it will do API calls to Salesforce to, for example, invoke an integration procedure. So one question that came up during the Q&A in yesterday's session was, what are the governor limits around OmniStudio? And generally, OmniStudio is subject to the same governor limits that you would have within just Salesforce core. So for example, there's one governor limit of you can only have 10 long-running transactions that are more than 5 seconds. If you have an integration procedure that's running for more than 5 seconds, that will count against that governor limit, and it's a shared governor limit with it, shared with everything else. So if you have, 7 integration procedures that are long running and 7 Apex classes that are long running, altogether you would have 14. You would be exceeding this limit, and you need to be conscious of that. Another common one to be aware of is specifically if we're using OmniOut. All of these things are doing API calls to Salesforce, so you should understand what is your API call allocation, calculate how, per OmniScript, how many API calls would you expect it to execute on average, then calculate how many executions of that OmniScript would we have, average and maximum per day, per month, whatever. Compare that against your limits and, check if you're at risk of exceeding that governor limit or not, and then speak with your Salesforce AE on what options you have if you are exceeding those limits. All right, and this diagram shows a little bit of differences between similarities and differences between OmniScripts and screen flows. So in general, both are ways of building guided business processes. Both have a lot of similar functionality like branching logic. You can read and write data from Salesforce. You can embed custom LWCs, call Apex, et cetera, et cetera. I would say the biggest difference between them is from a designer point of view. OmniScripts have a lot more functionality, and it's generally easier to do more complex things within OmniScripts. And then the designers are quite different. In screen flows, we have more of a process-driven designer where it's more of like, it looks more like a flow chart. In OmniScript, you have more of a what you see is what you get designer, where you see a series of steps and it's all very visual. So you can kind of see what you're, what you're building would end up looking like in reality. Yeah, and really, I think you need to deep dive into both tools to understand the pros and cons of each. But generally, from my experience, OmniScript and OmniStudio has a lot more power behind it, and it's easier to do more complex things in OmniStudio compared to the equivalent Salesforce tools. Okay, and then because we have two tools kind of doing very similar things, one question that comes up often is, how do I choose between when I should use a flow and when I should use an OmniScript if I have a given use case? The slides that I'm sharing today, a majority of them are from Salesforce, and this is the Salesforce recommendation of how to do this. So if we're talking about, on the bottom here, we have personas, whether we're talking about a customer, partner, or an employee. On the left-hand side, we have what cloud we're talking about, if we're talking about a non-industry cloud or an industry cloud, and this is kind of the recommendation. So if we're in an industry cloud, which is what the session is about, we have these two options. So if we're a customer or a partner, we should opt to use OmniScript. And then if we're an employee, we have the option of either OmniScript or Flow, depending on the use case. I think the challenge of this is that your development team would need to be competent and be able to manage the DevOps process and all of that behind two different sets of tooling, which I think is quite difficult to manage. So my personal opinion behind this is, if you have OmniScript available and OmniStudio available, you should always opt to use OmniScript and OmniStudio for whatever scenario you're talking about, specifically because OmniStudio is generally more powerful than screen flows and the equivalent Salesforce tools. And from your development team point of view, it's easier to manage one set of tooling rather than two. The exceptions to this are some things you can only do in screen flows and flows that you cannot do in OmniScript. For example, we have like login flows that only will work with a flow. It will not work with an OmniScript. So you have to use a flow there because there's just no equivalent functionality in OmniScript. However, in that scenario, you can have a flow that embeds an OmniScript. So you just use a flow so that you can use that functionality, but the actual business logic sits in OmniScript. So again, at a high level, if you have OmniScript and OmniStudio available, I would recommend just using that. If you have some exceptions, deal with them on a one-by-one basis. All right, so that was for the front end or user experience, user interface side of things. Now we'll talk about the backend pieces. So we have data raptors. Data raptors are a way of retrieving data from Salesforce, transforming different data like one JSON payload to another or between XML and JSON, and to be able to load data back into Salesforce. So there are really three flavors of data raptors. We have extract. This is for pulling data from Salesforce. And then there's also something called a turbo extract. If we're talking about just one object, this is more performant than the normal extract. But both are doing basically it's the same thing of pulling data out of Salesforce. Then we have data raptor load. This is for creating and updating data into the Salesforce database, and then transform, which is for manipulating data, to and from JSON and XML or between two different JSON payloads. And then you can do different transformations on the data, like change the data types, use functions and formulas, and so on. And then we have integration procedures. So integration procedures are basically a declarative way of building business logic. This can be invoking a data raptor to, pull data out of Salesforce, write data into Salesforce. This can be to do calculations. This can be to invoke Apex. This can be to invoke APIs. Basically the equivalent of an auto-launched flow with more power to it. And then the integration procedures themselves can be invoked by the majority of the other OmniStudio components. They can be invoked by Apex. They can be invoked by a REST API. So a lot of power there. And then, I've been talking about these different things. How do they fit together? I think this diagram shows kind of how they, what is the connection point. So our front-end components are OmniScripts for guided processes, flex cards for declarative UIs, and then integration procedures are typically the connection between the front end and the back end. So the integration procedure will, pull data out of Salesforce, get data from an API, and then that will end up being the data source for a OmniScript or flex card and, end up surfacing the data. So the integration procedure is kind of the connection point between all of them. And then there are a few more things that are available as part of OmniStudio. I just covered the major ones. I wanted to highlight a couple additional ones as well. There's something called Business Rules Engine. This was recently launched and is kind of the equivalent of the former velocity calculation procedures, if you're familiar with those. So the business rule engine allows us to define a series of steps in a calculation that would ultimately give us a final calculation. So if we're talking about the insurance scenario, like from the previous OmniScript screenshots, let's say I'm an insurance company. I, as a customer, go to the insurance company and ask for car insurance. They would probably ask me, what is my age, nationality, how long have I been driving, what kind of car do I have, how old is it? All of those things would end up going into this business rule engine. There would be a series of calculations. Probably we would need to do VLOOKUPs into different, Excel sheets to figure out, okay, based on the car model, that would result in, this multiplier for the price, things like that. Business rule engine is a declarative way of doing all of that. And you can see in the screenshot what a calculation could look like. And then we have what are called decision matrices, where, if you have information that would be stored in an Excel spreadsheet, like, based on your age, we apply a different multiplier on top of the final price. That could be stored in a in a decision matrix. Instead of creating a custom object, creating a bunch of fields, loading data into the custom object, you use a decision matrix, upload your Excel sheet against that, and then you can use that decision matrix inside of this business rule engine or inside of a integration procedure or other things, for example. So in the insurance space, this is heavily used. On the communications cloud space, this can be used for attribute-based pricing as well. And yeah, just to summarize, so here are all the things we saw today. So we covered all of the things on the left-hand side except for document generation. Just to really quickly speak to document generation, if you've used any other document generation tools on the market, this is fundamentally the ability to create a document. That document can be a docx, a PowerPoint, an Excel sheet, It can also generate PDFs as well. And then the information from within that document can be coming from any Salesforce object. So a common use case here is, if we're talking about the insurance scenario, after we calculate your final price and show you the quote details, we would then generate, a PDF of the quote information and send that to you by email as, a receipt or an invoice. That's kind of what you would use document generation for. And then on the right-hand side, we can see the kind of Salesforce core tools that relate to all of these things. Okay, so I know that was a lot of information at once, but the core things to remember are OmniStudio is a way of building digital experiences. On the front-hand side, we have OmniScript and FlexCard. On the back-end side, we have integration procedures and data raptors. There's a bunch of other stuff, but if I had to pick the key things, it's those. So in the demo today, I wanted to reinforce that by showing a demo of these 4 different things and how they fit together and how OmniStudio looks from a developer or configurator point of view, and then how it looks from a user point of view at runtime. So in today's demo, I'll do a demo similar to what one of my former colleagues, August Krys, who is a product manager for Manufacturing Cloud at Salesforce, did. He posted this example on LinkedIn where in Automotive Cloud, you would have different vehicles with their vehicle information, the make and model. He built a FlexCard where it will surface some information from within Salesforce about that vehicle, and then do an API call to OpenAI. If you've heard of ChatGPT, this is all the rage nowadays. OpenAI is the vendor for this, and they provide the same functionality that ChatGPT uses via API. So he is calling that same API that ChatGPT is doing, sending some of the vehicle information, and then OpenAI is returning back via AI this recommendation in terms of the cost of different parts. And then in a FlexCard, we're showing all of that together. So, if we didn't have OmniStudio, the way we would build this is create a custom LWC. In the custom LWC, do some SOQL queries for fetching data from Salesforce, do some REST API calls for fetching data or for invoking this API, and then showing it all in the LWC. I mean, that's great. The solution works, but it's purely code. Here, we'll do basically the same thing, but purely configuration. And then in this example, what I'm doing is I'm taking an asset for a customer. So this would be like a mobile phone that they've purchased in the past. And then we'll use a FlexCard to show some information about that asset that's coming from Salesforce, and also do a call out to OpenAI to fetch a marketing description about that asset. But you can imagine any other scenario. Maybe we don't have a good repository for images, so we want OpenAI to return us an image URL that we would show on the FlexCard. That would also work. And here's kind of the architecture of what's happening. So on the top-hand side, we have the front end. On the bottom, we have the back end. We would go to an asset record page. So from the asset lightning page, we have the asset ID that will be inputted into the FlexCard. The FlexCard will also have an action surface so that we can launch an OmniScript. This is if the customer wanted to modify their asset. I won't go into detail of what's happening inside of the OmniScript, but just to show you that, from a FlexCard, we can have some conditional business actions that are happening that would guide the user through different processes. Then on the backend side, the FlexCard is basically surfacing the data from within Salesforce about that asset and from the API call. So the data source for this FlexCard is an integration procedure that will, get the asset ID. Based on the asset ID, it will run a data raptor, which will fetch some of the asset details. We'll also fetch an attachment record. So the attachment record would store the URL of the image that we're showing, and then it would return, both of these pieces of data together. Then the integration procedure will do a REST call out to OpenAI, and then it will do a data raptor transform to basically combine the information from both of these in a nice simple format, so that it can be displayed in the FlexCard, and then ultimately that's what the FlexCard is showing. So let's jump into the demo. In the interest of time, I won't build this from scratch. I'll just show you what it looks like from a runtime perspective, and then go through the different components in the design time, so you can see how it's configured. So at runtime, this is what's happening. So if I go to this asset record, you can see that we have the FlexCard available here. I'll just reload the page. So here, this is just the standard Lightning page. We can see the asset ID here. We have some other Salesforce components and flex cards on the left-hand side. And then over here, we see the asset ID. So this is Samsung S10. We can see the image. This is coming from an attachment record. And then we see some hard-coded text, marketing description from OpenAI, and then the actual text that's coming from OpenAI. And then over here, I have this modify asset action. If I click on this, what this is doing is it's invoking an integration procedure and then passing the ID of the asset into this integration procedure. And this would allow us to do a modification of the asset. So here, this pops up the very first screen of that integration, or sorry, of that OmniScript. I won't deep dive into this, but just to show you that, generally the flex cards can launch OmniScripts to do different actions. So to take another example, let's say that we have like customer bills or invoices coming from a different system, but we want to surface them in Salesforce. If the customer has a complaint against a bill, or I don't know, wants a refund or something, we could have a raise complaint, request refund actions from that flex card, and then run OmniScripts to manage that process. So this is what it looks like from a design time perspective. Let me just go back here and I'll show you another asset so that we can see that it's showing different information depending on which assets I'm selecting. So what we have here is a customer that's calling into the call center, Marie Watson. We can see the different services that she has. So she has a few different internet services here, and then 2 different mobile phones. The Samsung S10 is what I was just showing. If I go to iPhone 12, this is a different one. And we'll see that it's surfacing a different marketing description from OpenAI and then showing the different image, different text here. So we can see iPhone 12 here. This is the asset name, the picture, and then some different marketing description coming from OpenAI. So this is the runtime experience. Let's switch here and I'll go to the design time experience. So this is how you as an app builder would actually build this. Let me just create a new version of this so we can see how the designer looks. Okay, so this is the designer. If I click on these different things, we can see that, this is the designer view is very visual, and it will show you what more or less what the runtime experience looks like. So as you're designing it, you can already see kind of what it looks like from the user perspective. So it's easier than switching back and forth between code and previewing it and so on. Here, if I click on this component, this is a text component. And then here I have a merge field for the name. So what it's doing is there's input coming from the data source, output coming from the data source called name. And that's what we're showing here. And then here it's merging in the name. Here, this is an image block, so it's merging in an output called attachments, and rather than showing just a URL, it's actually displaying it as an image. And then we have different parameters, like we can adjust the height, do styling, etc. on that. Here, I have another text block. I have some hard-coded text here, and then I'm merging in the marketing description here. If I go to the build and expand this, we can see the different fields that are available here, the different display elements that are available here. So I can embed other flex cards into this one or custom LWCs by dragging and dropping this into here. And then as I'm dragging and dropping, we can see that I can choose, where should that component be displayed here. So let's say I want to stick a, custom LWC in here. I can drag and drop that into here. Here, I'll see my list of custom LWCs. I can select one, pass whatever inputs I want, and there we go. And then here is the action. So this is the action launching the OmniScript. Here we can see that this is an action. The label is modify assets. And then what it is doing is, here we can choose the action type. So in this case, I'm choosing OmniScript to run an OmniScript, but there are a few other action types available. I'm choosing which specific OmniScript should it invoke, which is my asset viewer order flow for doing the change. And then I can pass it some data, which would be the ID or the asset ID that's being passed, and then it will open in a new window. And then the important thing here is, these are all the front end things, how is it actually getting the data, like the Samsung S10 that's in the data source. So if I go to the data source here, we can choose the data source type. In this case, I'm using integration procedures, but you can see that there are quite a few other options available as well. Then I would choose which specific integration procedure I'm choosing. So here we have Dubai Architects get asset details. I'll show this integration procedure in just a moment. Then into that integration procedure, I'm passing a key called ID and this value, which is the record ID or the asset ID that this is for. And then over here, I need to choose some test parameters so that in this designer, from a testing perspective, it has a record to surface. Here, I'm picking a record ID and passing that same record ID that I was showing. And then here, I'm pulling just this information out of the integration procedure to render here. So that's the front end piece of it. Let me then go to the integration procedure, and I'll show you how that's configured. So in the integration procedure, we have a list of all of the integration procedures here. The one that we're invoking is this Dubai Architects get asset details. This is the one that the Flex card was referencing. And then I can go to this one to see how it's configured. Okay, so this is the integration procedure designer. We see kind of a sequential series of steps here, where here we have a data raptor extract to extract some asset details and the attachment record details. Then we do this call out to OpenAI. Then we do a data raptor transform to merge these two pieces of data together, and we do a response action to give an output for the data raptor, which will basically be the output of this data raptor transform. So if we look at each of these components, this extract asset details, what's happening is we're passing it an input key called ID, and then merging in the ID that's an input for this data raptor, or sorry, for this integration procedure. Then on the next step, we're doing this call out to OpenAI. So here I have a named credential called OpenAI. This is handling the authentication to OpenAI. This is, standard Salesforce functionality. You would do the same thing if you wanted to do a REST API call through Apex, and you can actually reuse exactly this named credential for Apex if you wanted. Then it's calling this specific API endpoint for V1 completions. This is the API that's used for ChatGPT, and it's doing a post HTTP method. And then the actual data it's passing is the following. So it's passing for the model this. For the prompt this, so it's saying we're giving it a prompt saying how would you describe a, and then the asset name to a customer. So how would you describe how would you describe Samsung Galaxy S20 S10 to a customer? And then how do I know that I should pass these things? How do I know this API endpoint? If you go to the OpenAI API documentation and go to this create completion API, you can see all of the details here, and it explains, what do you need to pass for each of the parameters, and it will show you, here is an example of their request, so you can pass these things, and then that will give you this kind of response. So really the key thing is this prompt. This should be an English sentence that, you're asking it a question and expecting an answer for. So the question we're asking it is, how would you describe a Samsung S10 to a customer? In other words, what is a marketing description for Samsung S10? And then that's what it's returning. The key thing here is we're dynamically passing some information. So at runtime, this would actually become the Samsung S10. Then we go to our data raptor transform, and we're passing two things to it. So we're passing a node called asset that will have the output of our first data raptor, and a node called OpenAI that will have the output of our HTTP action. And then if I wanted to, I can just drag and drop additional things on here. Let me create a new version. I'll show you how that looks. So let's say that we also want to do, for example, a calculation on top of this. We can use these decision matrices, or they're formally called calculation matrices, by dragging a matrix action. Let's say that we want this to happen, I don't know, after we extract the asset details, then we can configure all of the components here. And let's say that we also want to do I don't know, a second data raptor extract. After that, we can then drag and drop it here, and there we go. So, you know, we just configure it like that. So let me delete those two components. And then let me show you the data raptors behind this as well. Or sorry, let me show you the preview. So if I, in the first step here, what I'm doing is I'm invoking this data raptor, extract asset details, and I'm passing it for ID, the ID that's coming in from the integration procedure. So that ID is mapping to this and this value. So if I run this, this is the previewer or debugger. This is basically a way to run the integration procedure and see what kind of output it's giving us. And then once it finishes loading, we'll see the response over here. Okay, so I noticed that this API times out, you know, every other time I run it. I'm not really sure why, but it seems like an issue with the API. If I run it again, we should see the output that would include the asset details and our API response. So here it's returning, you know, the attachment. This is the URL that we're showing, the name, the ID, and then the marketing description. This is coming from OpenAI. So basically, this is passed into that first data raptor, and then the additional logic is happening as I was explaining. On the right-hand side, we can go through each of the different elements and see what's happening. So here, if we go to this extract asset details debug, this is basically showing the input that's being passed into that first data raptor, which is a key called, you know, it's this input, which is this JSON. It's passing this ID, a key called ID, and this specific ID. And then if we go here, this shows us the output. So the output is a node called assets with these 3 child nodes and those values. Then we go to this open AI callout. We can see this is the input or the body for that API call. So the prompt that we're sending it is, how would you describe a Samsung S10 to a customer? We're calling this endpoint and so on. And then that is giving us this response. So we can see it gives us a response with a list called choices. Inside that list, we have one item, and then there's a child node called text, and the text contains the actual response that it's giving us. Then we can look at the data raptor transform. So we're passing all of this, our asset node that came from that first data raptor, this OpenAI that came from the API call, and it gives us this response. So simplified view where we have asset and then the attachments, name, ID, and marketing description. And then finally, that is the same output that we're sending. So let me click into these data raptors and show how the data raptors are configured. All right, so this is our extract data raptor. We're extracting data out of 2 objects. There's the asset object. Here, what we're doing is we're specifying an output path of assets. So this is where the data will be outputted to. And then we're building the where clause here, basically. So we say that give me the assets where the ID field equals this ID, and this is a merge field. Then we're saying give me the velocity attachments. This is an object that's available as part of the Communications Cloud data model that will store, that can be used to store, you know, images, marketing, documents, things like that. And the connection point between the asset and the velocity attachment is that we want the object ID field to equal the assets product to field. So that's what we're doing here. We're saying, give me the attachments where that is true. And then that is the data that we're fetching. Then we need to define the output. So this is how we want the output to look. You know, what data are we mapping to it? So here I'm saying from the asset, which matches this here, give me the ID, and then we'll output it to something called asset with the child node ID. Same thing for the name, for the parent ID, and then for the attachments, we're saying from the attachments, which is this, give me the field called URL long, and put it into that asset as a child node called attachments. And because there's only one asset, one attachment, we don't have any lists. We just have a single thing. And then here is how the preview would look. So similar to the integration procedure preview, we can pass an input. So we're saying for the ID, pass this value, and it gives us this as the output. Then the next one is the API call. I showed how this works. You just directly configure it here. And then we have the transform data raptor. So let me show you that one. So here, because we're not extracting data from Salesforce, we're just mapping JSON to JSON. What we're doing is just doing the transformations or the mappings. So here we're saying from the asset node, grab the asset and put it into an output node called asset. And then from the OpenAPI node, go to the choices node, go to the text node, and put it into the asset node as a child node called marketing description. So in other words, what we're saying is basically, copy this, and then from this, go to choices, go to text, and add it as another node in here called marketing description. So if I execute it, that's what we get. And then if I run the whole thing again, this is the final output of doing all of those actions together. So that's what I want to show for the demo. If you're interested, you can spin up a OmniStudio demo org and build something similar to this. You can choose, different prompts for your OpenAI API. It's actually pretty fun to play with. So give that a try if you're interested. One other thing to note is that if you do want to play around with this, you'll have to register an account and create an account, and then get an API key. The API key will be tied to you. You can see mine is partially hidden here, and you'll need that API key to authenticate to OpenAI, and then they give you a certain amount of free credits, but every API call will consume some credits. So just keep that in mind. So let's go back to the slides and wrap this up. So again, this is what we saw during the demo. We have that asset lightning page. We put the flex card into it. From the flex card, we can launch an action, which will launch an Omni script. And then that flex card is sourcing data via that integration procedure we saw. That integration procedure is doing three things: a data raptor extract to fetch the asset and attachment record, HTTP callout, REST API callout to OpenAI, and then a data raptor transform to return some clean data. And then that's what we display in the flex card. And one more thing I want to show. So if we go back to the runtime view, the flex card ends up becoming a custom component in the Lightning app builder. So here, what I do is edit the page to go to the Lightning app builder, and then I'll be able to see the different components that are available on the page. And then this component right here is the flex card. So on the left-hand side here, there's a custom list of components. This takes a while to load the first time you open the app builder. But you would see all of the flex cards or Omni scripts that you build. You can then just drag and drop them here or move them around on the page. All right, and one more thing. You might notice that the one other thing I want to highlight for the integration procedure is you'll have some performance metrics around this. So we can see that from the server perspective, this integration procedure is taking about 7 seconds to execute. Let me just run it one more time so we can compare. Here it's timing out. Let's do it one more time. Here it's taking about 6 seconds. So, 6-second performance isn't really something that we would want to have for a customer-facing application. Why is that happening? It's primarily because of this OpenAI callout. I noticed that the performance of this is quite bad. If I deactivate this, I can run the same integration procedure and then see that the performance is, 0.3 seconds. So we can see that OpenAI callout is what is causing the long performance. So you would also need to think about this, not only how I can build this from a technical point of view, but from a user experience, from a performance point of view, does it make sense in our use case? So in that use case of getting a marketing description probably not good because we wouldn't want to make a customer wait 6 or 7 seconds. We can fetch that marketing description once, update the ASCII record, and then directly fetch it from the ASCII record like this, and then our performance will be 0.3 seconds. So also keep that in mind while you're using OmniStudio. Okay, so just to wrap up, the last topic here is on the certifications and credentials. So for OmniStudio, there are 2 credentials. There's OmniStudio Developer and Consultant. These are both certifications. You can go to the Trailmixes here. For Communications Cloud, the relevant credential available is these 2, of course. And then also Industry CPQ Developer, you can go to the Trailmix there. And if you work for a Salesforce partner, there's a lot of great materials on Partner Learning Camp. So definitely check that out as supplemental materials. In addition to that, there are a bunch of different industries credentials. So there are 2 industries certifications that have been around for a few years. There's Education Cloud Consultant and Nonprofit Cloud Consultant. And then for Salesforce partners, there are accredited professionals that cover all of the industry clouds, except I think energy, government, I think there was 1 or 2 more. But you can see that it covers quite a few of them. For example, Financial Services Cloud, Communications Cloud. So definitely check these out if you're interested in working in any of these industries. And for additional resources, so this was just an intro session. We spent about 1 hour to get a basic understanding of OmniStudio, how the pieces fit together. When would you use OmniStudio? What is it for, etc. If you want to do a deeper dive, there's this Apex Hours OmniStudio series where we have a series of 12 sessions where we go through 8 different topics. And then it will go through each of the topics in detail, do some hands-on demos where the different speakers are building these different components one by one and showing how they fit together. So this is a great supplement to the Trailhead materials if you're preparing for the OmniStudio certifications or if you're preparing for your very first project. On the Communications Cloud side, there are 2 additional Apex Hour sessions. One for Introduction to Industry CPQ. This is one that I did when I was back at Salesforce. It's about, I think, an hour and a half or so that gives an introduction to industry CPQ, EPC, etc. So you can see kind of how that works to get a basic understanding. And a similar session for my former colleague, Mehboob, on industries order management. So it's about, I think, an hour and a half or 2 hours that gives, some demos and gives you an understanding of what industries OM is and how it fits in with CPQ. So if you're interested in Communications Cloud, media, or energy, check those out. And that was it for today's session. So I know that was a lot of material, but hopefully at least you got a basic understanding of what is Industry Cloud, what is OmniStudio, how does OmniStudio fit in with Industry Cloud, and then you can get at least a basic understanding of, as a user, what does it look like? As a developer or app builder, what would be the experience for you? So hope that gave you a basic understanding. And again, if you're interested, check out those additional materials for more detail. And then this is pre-recorded, so if you have any questions, feel free to just ping me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to help you offline with any questions. So hope this was helpful and hope to see you at the next Dubai Architect User Group meeting. See you next time. Thank you. Bye.